originally on March 11, 2014. Here, through a translator, are former Mayor Itagawa's thoughts from that time. He outlines his disappointment and fears connected with the Fukushima Daiichi accident and his concerns about the societal malaise affecting Japan.
2011年3月11日
3 years have passed already. The feelings of regret and frustration caused by the deplorable circumstances of March 11, 2011 continue even now. What is most frustrating is that the government and TEPCO promised us that the nuclear power plant would not cause an accident. As mayor, I sat in my office with those people over the years and discussed the possibilities of an accident occurring. Did they tell the truth? They always said, "Mr. Mayor, don't worry. An accident will definitely never happen." Well, the nuclear power plant broke down pretty easily in the earthquake and tsunami, didn't it? It fell apart that easily, didn't it? The operation of nuclear power plants was based on a lie. This accident is proof that nuclear power is an incomplete technology. Furthermore, the nuclear power plant destroyed our town. The town is a public entity. A privately owned, for-profit utility corporation destroyed a public body, our town. I don't think there is another example like this in history. Horrible things happened after Chernobyl too, but the conditions in this country are different. In Japan, we have the right to self-government. It is the nuclear accident that has broken down this system and set people adrift. And because they haven't received enough compensation, they have lost their futures. The villagers who have lost their dreams are heartbroken. In the midst of all this sorrow, Prime Minister Abe is facing outward and promoting exports of nuclear power plants. Despite the nuclear situation in his own country being unclear, and with the cleanup of the accident still not progressing, Abe is trying to pass off defective merchandise as top world-class technology. It's embarrassing, isn't it? As a Japanese citizen, I am truly ashamed. When Japan was a healthy country, we did not try to sell imperfect goods. During the time when Japan valued quality above all else, this would not have happened. Furthermore, the contaminated water from the plant is polluting the Pacific Ocean more and more. I feel humiliated when Abe lies to the world, when he says that the radioactive contamination is completely blocked from spreading further into the ocean. We have to return to our roots. We have a right to go back. It is really unfortunate that there is not a single politician or bureaucrat who has been able to stop this problem. I urge the people of the world to take a look at us. What kind of lives are we being forced to live right now? Even though we are not the ones who caused the accident, we are living in conditions that punish us for what happened. Our dreams, our children's futures, our towns have all been destroyed. We've been swept to the very margins of Japanese society and told to live there in silence. I don't wish these tragic circumstances on anyone ever again. Nuclear facilities bring misfortune on humankind. We all need to raise our voices and demand a safe environment where we can live and children can have dreams. We inherited a clean environment from our parents, but I, as a parent, cannot pass along a clean and beautiful town to my own children. This sad situation can never happen again. Please, don't just help us. Please help humankind.
That was Katsutaka Edogawa, the former mayor of Futaba, as recorded for Nuclear Hot Seat number 142 for March 11 of 2014. We also learned last week that more than 20,000 people affected by the 2011 nuclear accident at Fukushima have set up an association to demand an apology and full compensation from Tokyo Electric Power Company and the national government. They include members of 12 organizations suing the utility and the government, as well as people who have been acting individually. As the government of Japan moves relentlessly towards lifting evacuation orders and cutting compensation to the victims, local residents continue to worry about the ongoing decommissioning of the reactors, the cleanup of the disaster site, and water leaks of radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. The group's joint representative, Ruiko Muto, said those who suffered from the accident have not been fully compensated. She says they want to make their voices bigger by getting organizations to connect with each other. Again, as part of Nuclear Hot Seat's Voices from Japan series, we spoke with Ruiko Muto for Nuclear Hot Seat number 142, the third Fukushima Anniversary Edition, which originally aired on March 11, 2014. Ruiko Muto is from Maharu Town, Fukushima Prefecture. She ran a cafe in Tamura City, Fukushima, but was forced to close her shop. Since then, she has been a leader of a large group of Fukushima residents who have filed a criminal complaint against TEPCO and the Japanese government. The case has still not been resolved.
福島原発事故当初、日本の国や東京電力がしたことは、事実を隠蔽すること、事故を過小評価すること、そして基準値を変えること。
The government and TEPCO have been concealing facts and playing down the effects of the Fukushima Daiichi accident and changing standards at will. Because of that, we have been exposed to radiation and forced to live in a difficult situation. 3 years have passed, and the suffering caused by the accident has changed form and increased. In December 2012, then Prime Minister Noda made a recovery declaration. The nation and Fukushima Prefecture's policy was to decontaminate, repatriate the evacuees, and work toward restoration. A huge decontamination effort began, but there are many areas that have not reached the 1 millisievert annual dosage standard. Despite this, repatriation is being pushed forward. Recently, Miyakoji Town in Tamura District was the first area to have the evacuation order lifted. There are many places in Miyakoji where the radiation levels are high. In areas where the levels are more than 1 millisievert, the government is distributing radiation monitors and telling residents to manage on their own. The school had moved their operations outside the prefecture, but they will now have to return to Miyakoji. Some students who are still living in the areas they evacuated will have to travel by bus up to 40 minutes to go to school, which is closer to Fukushima Daiichi than where they are living. Immediately after the accident, food products from outside the prefecture were used in school lunches. But since the second year, most of the products are from inside Fukushima. There are some people who suggest that we should use the school lunch program to increase consumption of Fukushima products and wipe away harmful rumors about radiation. There are some people who suggest that we should use the school lunch program to increase consumption of Fukushima products and wipe away harmful rumors about radiation. Farmers are torn between continuing their livelihoods and their desire to provide safe food products. This contradiction is the burden placed on the dignity of the farmers. Furthermore, plastic bags of decontamination soil and debris cover the rice paddies and line the roads in piles 3 to 4 deep as far as the eye can see, and the plastic bags will only last for 3 to 5 years. The bags are next to houses and buried under school playgrounds. Amid this, people go about their daily lives. Debris that is under 8,000 becquerels per kilogram is incinerated in existing facilities. Debris that is over 8,000 becquerels per kilogram will be burned in special incinerators being built by the Environment Ministry all around Fukushima Prefecture. They have not fully informed the residents about these plans. People are divided between those who want to return home and those who still feel uneasy about the situation. If they go back, they don't know whether they will be able to farm, and infrastructure like shops and hospitals are still not in place. Elderly people who have given up are still living in temporary housing despite having their compensation cut. They do not have enough to eat, and during the new year, there was an emergency SOS project to help them. People who are living in temporary housing are becoming depressed. The atmosphere is becoming antagonistic. Also, government ministries and groups have been promoting various radiation safety and risk communication campaigns that are aimed at children and young people. The situation in Fukushima is still very severe.
What do you think is the most serious problem?
Children being detained in areas where the radiation levels are high. Also, in the criminal complaint we filed against the Japanese government and TEPCO, the trouble is that there are many plaintiffs, but no specific person that is the perpetrator. When over 14,000 of us initially filed, the case was dismissed. Even though the disaster was man-made, there is no one to take responsibility. I think this is really strange. Furthermore, they're talking about restarting other reactors and pushing nuclear exports when no one has taken the blame for the accident. And yet, victims haven't received enough assistance.
Do you have anything to say about the prosecutors in the case?
Well, the forensic criminal investigation that we had asked for was not granted. Another problem was the change of venue. We filed in Fukushima, but the trial was moved to the Tokyo District Prosecutor's Office. In Japan, you can request that the prosecutor's decision be reviewed by the jury-like panel. We wanted that to happen in Fukushima, but the review took place in Tokyo too. I think that not doing this in Fukushima, where there are a large number of plaintiffs, was intentional. And listening to the prosecutor's reasoning made me feel like their lawyers retained by TEPCO.
So you're saying that the system allows a change of venue without reason?
It's not common, but it is allowed.
Was a reason given?
We are told that the defendants were in Tokyo, and that the Fukushima District Prosecutor's Office sent the case to the Tokyo District Office. I don't understand either of these reasons.
Yeah, it is hard to understand, isn't it? Is there anything else that you are involved in, aside from the trial?
I'm the lead plaintiff, so that's what I'm mostly doing. But I'm also involved in the collective evacuation trial effort. I'm also helping with efforts to get opportunities for educational exchange programs outside of Fukushima for children. And I travel all over Japan for speaking engagements to talk about Fukushima.
Do you have a message for our listeners?
Yes. The accident occurred in Fukushima, but this kind of catastrophe could happen anywhere. Therefore, I wish everyone would see Fukushima as their problem, too.
Activist Ruiko Muto, as originally heard on Nuclear Hot Seat number 142 on March 11 of 2014. Over to the U.S. now, where a Texas company seeking to store the nation's high-level spent nuclear fuel got a boost on May 19 when a Senate subcommittee forwarded to the Full Appropriations Committee a bill that authorizes a pilot program to remove spent but still highly radioactive fuel from decommissioned nuclear sites. Waste Control Specialists, or WCS, wants to store the waste at its facility in rural Andrews County, which was hard hit in recent weeks by the Texas biblical flooding of 2015. The site already stores tons of low-level radioactive waste, including that which has been shipped from the waste isolation pilot plant in New Mexico that has been out of commission since an accident on Valentine's Day 2014. You'll learn more about WIP during today's featured interview. Part of what the Senate is setting up with WCS is the shipping of the nation's spent nuclear fuel away from sites where it was generated, something which has never before happened, and raises a whole slew of concerns under the general title, Mobile Chernobyl. Now it turns out that Areva Incorporated is set to take a lead role in designing, constructing, and operating this interim storage facility. What's wrong with that? The French nuclear giant has been headed for bankruptcy. Its shares have lost 55% of their value since the beginning of the year, and the company's losses for 2014 exceed 1 billion euros, which is more than 1 trillion American dollars. Not very reassuring. I spoke with Donna Gilmore of San Onofre Safety, who is our movement's expert on dry casks and the problems with them. Her knowledge so extensive that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission invited her to come and lecture at their headquarters to bring their staff and commissioners up to speed on dry cask storage and the problems therein. Donna told me that the Areva canisters are of the thin canister type, with only 5/16 of an inch of steel between the highly radioactive plutonium-containing fuel rods and all the rest of us. These are thin canisters, thin as in tin cans. Further, the transport cask that Areva created for high burn-up fuel, this is the most radioactive kind, was approved by the NRC by hiding 100% of the justification for the approval as proprietary. This is what shows up in the NRC approval documents. It's proprietary, so we can't tell you. And this is what is being proposed to vouchsafe the safety of our high-level nuclear fuel waste in a flood zone and tornado zone in Texas. The U.S. military is concerned as oil bomb trains, as they are calling them, roll dangerously close to nuclear bomb silos. Since the latest oil train derailment and explosion in Heimdall, North Dakota, a recent report by Rachel Maddow reveals that the U.S. military is very concerned about the proximity of those oil train tracks to the missile silos, There are 150 nuclear missiles buried in the ground under North Dakota. This is akin to the civilians in New York City being concerned because there's about to be a gas pipeline put butt and cheek next to the Indian Point nuclear reactor, only 38 miles from the beautiful island of Manhattan. As the song says, what are those people thinking? What have those boys been drinking? Well, here's another goodie. Sometime this year, on the U.S. Army's Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, radioactive gas is going to be released into the atmosphere. In a presentation to the public made last October, those so-called nuclear experts said that the radioactive gas releases are supposed to be roughly equal to the exposure a person would get from some X-rays or body scans. Nobody defined how many X-rays, how strong they were, how long they would be left on. Just, it's like an X-ray. Forget about it. Reportedly, Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment are studying the radiation proposal and forming an opinion. We'll try to find out what it is for you, but I bet you can guess. By the way, in 1968, Dugway was in the midst of open-air testing of the nerve gas VX when thousands of Utah sheep began dying. A 1970 report by researchers at the Army's Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland said there was incontrovertible evidence, their word, incontrovertible evidence, that nerve gas killed the sheep. But the Army never has acknowledged that it or the Dugway testing was responsible. And we're trusting these people with an atmospheric release of radioactive gas? And some quickies from the NRC. The Riverbend Nuclear Facility in Louisiana experienced a hot shutdown on June 1st, and the reactor had to be scrammed due to low reactor water level. Prairie Island in Minnesota went to hot standby on June 1st because there was a manual reactor trip due to, just a lot of stuff with the feed water pump. And at Cook in Michigan on May 31st, there was a shutdown due to failure of an emergency diesel generator. You know, the thing that's required to keep the reactor cool in case of an accident. Always good to know how our aging, decrepit, dangerous nuclear bombs on the ground in our backyard disguised as nuclear reactors are holding up. One last nuke note from the U.S. University of California officials have decided to shut down a 20-year-old nuclear reactor on the UC Berkeley campus, saying that the political hassling it sparked outweighed its usefulness. Internationally, the food fight over Fukushima and Japanese food is coming to a boil. Since the start of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, Taiwan banned imports of food from 5 prefectures in Japan, Fukushima Prefecture and 4 others that were close by. It also required radiation tests on over 800 different kinds of food imports from that country. However, in recent weeks, Japanese contaminated area products were found illegally imported into Taiwan with deceptive labeling that allowed them to be sold in that country. In mid-May, data from Taiwan showed food imports, primarily green tea, that originated in Japan contained radioactive cesium levels that were below Taiwan's limit of 370 becquerels per kilogram, but above Japan's limit of 100 becquerels per kilogram. So Japan was dumping their too radioactive to sell at home green tea on Taiwan. Can you blame the guys for wanting to block imports? Now, the Japanese Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries has stated that the measures of Taiwan are not based on scientific facts and suggested the possibility to appeal to the World Trade Organization. They're not kidding either, because Japan has already launched a trade complaint at the WTO to challenge South Korea's import bans and requirement of additional testing requirements for Japanese food since the Fukushima nuclear disaster began. South Korea expressed regret at Japan's actions and said its ban on some Japanese seafood was necessary and reflected safety concerns. Which is odd because South Korea has imported more than 100,000 tons of fish from Japan even since the nuclear disaster began. But in Australia, it seems that they are still importing seafood and seaweed without any tests in place, not unlike the United States. We'll have our featured interview in just a moment, but first, Nuclear Hot Seat relies on donations to keep the show going. If you find that we make you laugh, think, help you understand nuclear issues, or just not feel so alone with your awarenesses, help us keep doing it. Go to nuclearhotseat.com, scroll down on the homepage, and click on the big red donate button. Whatever you can do to help, merci, gracias, arigato, and thank you. The Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, or WIPP site in Carlsbad, New Mexico, is an underground salt repository intended for plutonium-contaminated nuclear weapons waste. We, the American people, were promised that WIPP would safely store deadly nuclear waste for 10,000 years, maybe even longer. But after only 15 years of operations, on Valentine's Day, February 14, 2014, a 55-gallon drum of waste from the Los Alamos National Laboratory exploded, contaminating 8,000 feet of the underground facility with radioactive material, and also releasing an untold amount of plutonium and americium, highly dangerous radioactive isotopes, into the environment. The site has remained shut down ever since that Valentine's Day massacre, though a reopening has been touted by Energy Secretary Moniz for 2016. How realistic is that? To find out, Nuclear Hot Seat again reached out to our expert on all things WIPP, Don Hancock. He is the Executive Director of Southwest Information and Research Center, a nuclear watchdog group headquartered in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Don Hancock, welcome back to Nuclear Hot Seat.
Good morning.
What is the current status of the cleanup at the WIPP site?
Well, it depends on your perspective. DOE, Department of Energy, thinks it's going fine, and they're more or less on schedule to try to reopen the facility next spring. The rest of the world that's paying attention knows that they're not going to be reopening in 2016, and there are many unresolved issues that have to happen before they can get reopened, and so the cleanup is not going so well. At a minimum, it's well behind schedule, and at a maximum, we're still talking about trying to operate a facility that's contaminated in ways it was never supposed to be, and so nobody really knows how or whether it can be safely operated.
What are some of those issues that still have not been addressed?
There are several categories. From a technical standpoint, they don't really know how they're fixing, as they call it, contamination. They're not decontaminating. What they're trying to do with the contamination in the underground is cover it up, literally, by putting brattice cloth, by putting salt on it, and so that's what they're saying they're going to do. They don't know, this has never been done in a contaminated salt mine. We don't know technically that it'll work, even if it technically works for a week or two or three or a month or two or three, because the mine is always moving around. The floors, the ceilings are moving. If it quote-unquote works for a month, doesn't mean that it works for 2 months or 3 months or 6 months or a year or whatever. So technically, they're trying to do something that they don't know will work in terms of having the facility so they can operate it at all. Obviously, they still don't have enough air, ventilation running through the mine to do any kind of operation or any kind of major mining. Remember, since February of 2014, they've only been running about 60,000 cubic feet per minute of air through the facility, and it all has to be filtered because the air has radiation contamination in it, because you have radiation contamination in the underground. So that's a severe technical problem that they haven't resolved.
Does that mean that there isn't enough air for the people underground to breathe? Should they be involved in any kind of work down there?
All the workers in most of the underground are wearing self-breathing apparatus. So they have supplied air that they're using, and yes, they need to have that because they shouldn't be breathing in the contaminated air in much of the underground. Some workers can go underground without self-breathing apparatus in the northern part of the mine, which DOE says is essentially not contaminated. The 60,000 cubic feet per minute of air is more than enough for somebody to breathe, but it's not enough to have sort of active mining operations. In other words, it's not just the radiation. Unfortunately, there is diesel equipment in the underground, and depending on physically what people are doing, the more you're exercising, the more oxygen you need to breathe in, et cetera, et cetera. So you can be in the underground at that amount of air, but there are severe limitations in terms of what kinds of things you can do. So, for example, as I mentioned, to operate this facility, you've got to be able to move heavy equipment around, diesel equipment around, which has to be adequately ventilated. To really reopen the facility, you have to do some new mining of new rooms. You can't run that kind of heavy mining equipment with that level. And so there's not controversy that there are very limited things they can do in the underground now, which is why DOE are trying to get more ventilation into the underground. So when the facility was operating full scale, it could have up to 425,000 cubic feet per minute of air flowing through. So you can see there's a big difference between 425,000 and 60,000. So they're very limited, and they recognize they're very limited in terms of what they can do in the underground. So that's a severe technical problem. A couple of major regulatory problems are out there. They can't operate the facility without approval of the state of New Mexico, which issues the operating permit for the facility, that permit that DOE has been and continues to violate since 2014. They cannot comply with many provisions of the permit by 2016, so either they're going to try to go forward without complying with the permit, which is not acceptable, or, and there are indications they're starting to do this, they're going to try to get all the provisions of the permit that they can't meet just changed. But that will be very contentious if that's what they try to do. Secondly, the Environmental Protection Agency, the federal agency, has some regulatory control over WIPP as well, and they're in what's called a recertification process. And in fact, EPA will be in New Mexico later this month on June 16th and 17th, June 16th in Carlsbad, June 17th in Albuquerque, to hear public comments about whether they should be recertifying and specifically whether the application that DOE put in for recertification is adequate, and it's clearly not adequate because their recertification application doesn't even mention the fact that they had a radiation leak and the underground is contaminated. So, I've just mentioned a few of the things that they clearly haven't complied with. I think it's clear, and I said publicly and privately to top DOE officials and to other agencies that there's no way they can be reopened in 2016. When I was in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago, a number of congressional staff who are paying attention also realized they're not going to get reopened in 2016, but DOE still wants to maintain the myth that they will be reopened in March or April of 2016.
Let me go back to something about the radiation. In early May, there